Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much. Yeah, pleasure to be here. Big fan of the pod.
I'm a fan of what you're doing with vinyl cutting and mastering, and have been following you on Instagram, of course. And then, of course, we met because you actually hired me to do a little bit of consulting.
Yeah.
And so that's initially how we met. But I just thought you'd make a great guest.
Oh, thanks.
Let's give the audience the broad overview of what you're doing now, and then let's go back to the origin story, to the beginning. So where are you at? What is your audio task that occupies your time?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so I'm in Leeds, West Yorkshire in the UK, and I run an analog-based mastering and record cutting studio here. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see my mastering setup behind me, some big old Tyler acoustic speakers and a rack of outboard over my shoulder. And in another room that you can't see, there's a room full of record cutting lathes, which I use to cut short runs of records for mainly independent artists.
We'll get into the record cutting aspect of what you do in a bit. But let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up quite close to Leeds, actually. Only a couple of hours away, in quite quite a small town. There wasn't a lot going on, so when I got the opportunity to move to come to a bigger city for university, then I jumped at the chance and never went back.
Where did you get your musical influence and or technology influence?
Neither of my parents were musicians or very musical, but they loved listening to music a lot. So we grew up with music on in the house a lot. And I just wanted to play guitar from a really young age. So we had the classic thing. We had piano lessons, and we hated learning classical piano as young kids. And I wanted to play loud, distorted guitar. So begged and begged for a guitar, finally got a guitar. And then this is so long ago, back in the olden days, that I can't even remember how I found out about this, but I found out that there was this cassette 4-track, and you could plug a guitar in and record onto it in your own house, and then you could sort of mess around and make your own songs. So I think we kept an eye out. This is how old I am, by the way. We kept an eye out, and in the classifieds section of the local newspaper, I found a second-hand one for sale, and bought that and messed around with it on 4-track cassette, and that's kind of where my journey started, I guess.
Did you know how to use it, or did you have to pop open the directions and figure out, like, well, what's the process?
Oh, it was very much trial by fire, and just pressing buttons and trying things out and making terrible sounding stuff for quite a long time. It didn't even come with instructions as far as I can remember. So it was just a case of, plugging an electric guitar straight in, no amps or anything like that. And buying some really, really cheap plastic microphones that you could plug in with a jack lead, just doing it like that, really.
Do you remember the moment at which you realized that you could overdub, that you could actually do sound on sound recording?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was the big thing, being able to plug a guitar in, noodle around, and then plug a mic in and do it afterwards. For anyone younger than me listening, this is pre-internet. So you couldn't just look stuff up on YouTube. There were no tutorials. I didn't have any idea how a recording studio worked, or how songs were recorded, or anything like that. So yeah, it really was like a mind-blowing experience of kind of figuring out, like, oh wow, like this is how they make the songs that I hear on the radio. This must be how they do it, but they do it a lot better than me.
Did the 4-track become a kind of a social point for you? Did friends come over and want to know about the new box, and what does this new piece of kit do? And
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. This is kind of mid-90s, early to mid-90s. So grunge era, everyone was into guitars and stuff. And my friends who were into that sort of stuff were kind of as obsessed as I was, really. They were like, I had one friend who literally started learning guitar because he came around and saw this thing. He was like, oh my God, this is crazy.
So in the beginning, were you recording music or were you recording your voice? Like, do you remember some of those early experiments?
Yeah, it was kind of recording guitar, I guess songs. Yeah, recording very crudely written songs. But yeah, that's what we were trying to do, record songs in with, very limited equipment.
That plants a seed. Where does that take you from there? How does this interest grow?
Yeah, well, really, luckily, there was a 2-year college course at a college fairly local to me. It was within driving distance. So over here, most people, when they hit 16, would go on to do A levels at school, and they would be like maths, biology, art or something like that. And I just didn't have any interest in that sort of thing. But luckily, this college course cropped up at just the right time, and it was in music technology. So there was a college that just installed a studio. They had a very early version of Pro Tools, and I enrolled and got on this course, and that was really the catalyst for wanting to make my life around recording and making music.
Was that a 4-year degree?
So that was a pre-university course. So over here, you kind of do school till you're 16, then you do 2 years of A levels, then you go on to university. So
okay,
it was quite rare to find those kind of creative courses pre-university at that time. So that was a 2-year course, and then doing that led me on to go onto university and sort of carry on doing the same thing.
You played guitar, but yet you had this interest. Was in your mind, did you ever say, I'd like to continue playing guitar and be a working musician and maybe go on to bigger, better things there? Or where were your interests or your allegiances?
I don't think I really had a specific kind of career in mind at that point. I loved playing guitar. The whole studio thing was kind of new and really exciting. I didn't really know that it could be a job. I didn't really know that being a musician could be a job either, really, at that stage. So I kind of just did the course because so I didn't have to get a full-time job, and I could play around at recording sounds and music and stuff.
And where did you take it from there? How did that progress?
So yeah, I did the 2-year course and then applied to university, which led me to move to Leeds. And that was a 3-year course, and we did a lot of studio recording and stuff there. But the course also split into lots of different modules around like building amplifiers, psychoacoustics, and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of gave us a grounding in lots of different areas of audio. It wasn't just a recording engineer kind of course.
Do you have key takeaways that you still look back and think, oh, I learned, this particular thing there that proved useful, or did it all just kind of wash over you?
Surprisingly, actually, the 2-year college course, the first one I did, was just amazing. Our tutor was an ex-pro musician, and he had us recording bands and musicians all the time, but he was really good at getting diverse music in. So we'd do like a rock band, we'd do a choir, we did some beatboxers, and he was really good at just throwing us in at the deep end and allowing us to run the sessions and stuff like that, and then kind of critiquing it afterwards. And I can remember one specific example actually of recording the beatboxers, and there was a selection of microphones, and the beatboxers wanted to use the biggest, most impressive looking mic, which was I can't remember what it was now, but it was a condenser mic. And really we should have been using a dynamic mic, because they were literally getting their mouths were on the mic itself. And we let the beatboxer guys choose the mic. And so it didn't sound very good. And so that was a really important lesson in our tutor saying, well, you should have told them that this mic's going to sound better. So although that one looks cool, you've got to sort of make the decision and take charge a little bit and do that. And that's, I was kind of 16, I'm 42 now. So I always remember that. So I think that's quite a good, it's good that that's stuck in my brain so long.
So do you think the instructor purposely let that situation fail to teach a very valuable lesson?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a lot of kind of time constraints and stuff as well, but yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm sure it's a temptation for instructors to try to say, no, this is how you do that, as opposed to just saying, okay, here's the goal, figure it out.
Yeah. It takes a lot of failing at things to improve and get better. So it's a much faster way to learn, failing at stuff, than having someone else just tell you what to do every time.
At what point did you start to realize that audio could be your career?
I don't think if I even realize it now.
What are you going to be when you grow up?
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Yeah. But I finished uni and I went into doing live sound straight away. And I was like, oh, okay, I can get paid to sort of stand behind a mixing desk and I can actually pay my rent doing this, and this is cool. And I was also kind of playing a little bit. I was doing some small gigs, and it's like, oh, this bar will pay me 50 quid to just go and sit and play some songs. That's crazy. As a 19, 20-year-old, I was like, well, yeah, if I can do that, then that's brilliant. I'll just keep trying to do that. So I was kind of doing a mix of live sound and sort of just playing little acoustic gigs. Since, for the last 20 years, I've always just felt like I've been getting away with it. So I'll keep going till someone tells me that I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, we're not going to pay you anymore.
Yeah.
Was there a temptation for you to go back home?
No, that was something that once I moved to Leeds and just got into going to gigs and saw how much there was going on compared to literally nothing where I was from. I've never had this sort of inclination to move back to a kind of small town after that.
And was there any thought process about moving to an even bigger town, like moving to London or moving out of the country?
Yeah, definitely. I toyed with moving to London at one point, and then I just had stuff happening here in Leeds. I had some really cool friends. The gig scene was great. I mean, it still is great, but back then there was loads of DIY gigs going on. It was really cool, and I was kind of getting work and getting by up here, which, as I said, I've kind of felt like I was cheating at somehow just being able to live and do musical stuff. So I never really had that real big drive to move to London and try and start all over again there, because I just found Leeds was great. There's so much going on.
How long did this, doing the occasional sound gig and playing guitar at a place, how long did that last, and what was the progression of that? What did that lead to?
I kind of stopped doing as much live sound and got into more playing as the years went on. And I'd play guitar for other people. I'd do some session stuff and play myself. So between my own stuff and playing guitar for quite a few different bands, I was kind of, making a living doing that for quite a while. Although I always had a little home recording and sort of mixing studio my whole time. So I'd always try and do bits for people who I knew. If I had a friend who was trying to record something, or especially when MySpace became a big thing, for you know, for anyone who remembers that, there was a huge thing where suddenly you could put your music online, and that was such a sort of catalyst in music becoming more accessible. I was kind of making my living playing, but always trying to get some kind of recording or mixing gigs from friends and friends of friends and stuff like that.
At this stage of the game, you're playing more, and it never occurred to you to be thinking, I want to be a rock star or something larger scale. Did you, like, what kind of gigs were you playing as a player?
Quite a lot of different stuff, actually. Anything from kind of small singer-songwriter sort of gigs, and then I'd play guitar with some bands that some were doing quite well, and we'd do sort of bigger gigs, and you know, do some slightly bigger tours and stuff like that. But it's kind of strange. It kind of never occurred to me at the time. These things all just kind of, each thing flowed off the back of the previous thing. So I'd never really had a grand plan, although I did always want to have a studio. I always loved the recording side, and I was like, well, I'm kind of paying my rent playing gigs at the minute, but one day I'll have a studio, and that was kind of my goal. But because gigs were where the money was at the time, I was just kind of taking whatever came my way, really.
Connect the dots for me. Where did the audio dreams start to materialize? When did they start to take a serious turn?
So, like, as I said, I would always be trying to do some recording and stuff for friends. And then just from playing live, we got a really great group of really amazing musicians. And a couple of us decided to start a small label, very, very small DIY record label, just really to put our own stuff out and kind of some of the other stuff that was around. And because I was the guy in the group that had always had the home studio, we'd sort of record at mine, and then everyone would just leave it to me. They'd just be like, "Oh, well, you know what you're doing, Ben. You just mix it and master it and just send us it when it's ready." So I was kind of in at the deep end, but, you know, but I was happy to do that. And when it got to the mastering stage, YouTube was around at this point, but there was nowhere near the amount of resources that there are now. So I don't even know if there were any really like audio specific channels and stuff like that at that point. So it was really hard to learn stuff, you know. So I basically rang around a load of studios in the UK and just said, like, who can teach me how to master stuff? You know, I've done a degree, I've got some experience, but I'm a bit lost in the mastering side. And I managed to find, over sort of the period of a year or two, a few studios that would run like weekend courses in mixing and mastering, or just mastering. So over the course of a couple of years, I would just drive all over the place to any studio that would teach me, basically. And so that's really where I started getting into mastering and thinking, oh, actually, I really like this part of the whole process.
And did the mastering side appeal to you more than the mixing or the recording side?
I always really liked recording, not so much mixing. And then when I found mastering, I just think I naturally was like, oh, I get what to do. I naturally could just like think, oh, I think this needs a little bit of just do these few tweaks, and I just kind of instantly felt like, oh, I can do this. I kind of get what this is all about.
And when did you start to actually put in motion plans of opening a mastering studio?
Yeah, very gradually. It's another one of these things where I would master. I started mastering for our own little record label, and then somehow we got some good press and some good plays on the radio and stuff like that. So people would, sort of friends would say, "Oh, could you? I heard you've done a bit of mastering. Could you master? Would you master our stuff?" And so I'd say, "Yeah, of course, definitely." And then it was kind of a very slow snowball of friends, and then a few friends of friends, and then maybe just someone who'd heard of, oh, there's this guy that does a bit of mastering, you should go and chat to him. And all through this I was still playing and still doing gigs, and that was my main income. Yeah, I don't know if there was like one definitive point where I thought, right, I'm going to stop doing that and just do mastering. It kind of, especially at the pandemic, up till the pandemic, I was still doing like live stuff, and I'd been wanting to sort of give up the live stuff for a couple of years, but I just kept saying yes to things. People would go, "Oh, could you come and do this tour or do this gig?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that."
And you're talking about playing guitar with people, or were you also continuing to do any live sound?
No, I kind of stopped the live sound quite a long time ago. Yeah, I kind of realised that wasn't really what I wanted to do a lot fairly early on. Especially when I could like turn up and play a gig instead of getting there at 4 PM and doing all the sound and then doing the gig and packing down. I could just walk in and with a guitar and quick strum for sound check and play for an hour and leave. I was like, well, that's way better than running the sound. So I'll do that one.
Yeah. Put it together for me. Tell me about the formation of the studio that you're in now. How did this come about?
Yeah, so I guess I'd been mastering for people in my home studio for quite a while, and it got to the point where I was just doing about 40 hours a week of doing that. And I was like, well, this is kind of my job now, and I've always wanted a studio, so I guess I'll start looking for a space and trying so I can kind of level up the acoustics and sort of work on that side of stuff. Again, a weird chain of events. I had a friend, and his friend had a room in the building that I'm now in and was leaving. And he said, "Oh, you should go for a look." And I managed to get the owner's contact details, came for a look around, and the room that I'm in now was available. And so I kind of just took the plunge and rented this room. That kind of solidified my journey, I guess, as really, really sticking to mastering it and not taking on other types of audio gigs.
Had you acquired the gear before the room?
Some of it, yeah. I'd been buying gear since the old cassette 4-track. I would always, the college course we learnt on as well was a lot of had a lot of outboard, and we were using a desk and stuff. So that's how I learnt like audio processing. So I've always been comfortable with outboard and analog. So that's kind of, I like taking things apart and fixing things and sort of knowing how stuff works. So I've always been I've bought and sold compressors and EQs just over the last sort of 25 years, and ever so slowly worked my way up to better and better gear.
What was your criteria for the space? I mean, did you have a thought like, this is the kind of space I need, or did you just say, this space is available, the conditions are ideal, I'll make it work?
Pretty much that, really. It's really hard to find a commercial space in Leeds where you could make a lot of noise. Basically, I'm in an old mill building, but a lot of the mill buildings in Leeds have been turned into offices and stuff like that. Yeah, I spent a long time looking for somewhere previously, and would get knocked back by estate agents all the time. The minute they heard that you wanted to put a music studio in, they would just say, no, we're not having that in any of our buildings. So this complex is actually purpose built. There's other studios in this complex, and there's some producers and DJs, and there's a guy that fixes record decks and all sorts. So yeah, really kind of lucked out. And it just happened to be the only thing available as well. So
interesting. So other than this building that you're in, the process of dealing with agents, for finding a commercial space, is that challenging in general? I mean, are they just, super conservative, and the minute you mention music and making noise, are they all just kind of like, whoa, I don't have anything like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've not really had to deal with them for quite a while now, but that was my experience. Yeah, and I think just any buildings that would have been suitable have just been really modernised with small air-conditioned offices put in, where it would just not suit an audio kind of environment where you'd need to, do some soundproofing and some acoustic treatment and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's tough to find a space at the minute, I think.
Now, you started out primarily just mastering, but at some point the record cutting entered the picture. Can you talk about that part of it?
Yeah, sure. Going back in 20 odd years when I first moved to Leeds, there was this guy with a flat, and he had what I now know is called a suitcase lathe, and it is the size of a kind of a suitcase, and it has a mini record cutting lathe inside it, and they were kind of made for just the hobbyist. The results aren't very good, but I remember going into this guy's flat, and he would get a song and he would cut it onto a record, and then you could listen to it like there and then, and that just blew my mind. And ever since then, I was like, I want one of these machines. This is my life goal, to get one of these machines. But they're very rare, they're very hard to come by, and so I'd sort of look every couple of years. I'd frantically, scour the internet and try and find one. Never have any luck, and just give up for another year or two. And then about 5 years ago, I found one for sale, and there were 3 people, I think, or 4 that wanted to buy it. And so it's a very small world, the record cutting world. So it can be a bit strange, but we all kind of interviewed to buy this lathe, and because of my background in audio, I think, and the seller said that I seemed like I had my head screwed on, thankfully, he decided to sell it to me. So I had a very, very steep learning curve of figuring out how to restore a record cutting lathe, of which I had zero experience, and then how to cut records. So that was about 5 years ago when I've got the first lathe. Very steep learning curve. Learned a lot with the help of some really great people on the internet and in person. And now I've got 3 lathes running, and yeah, I'm sort of cutting records every day now.
3. Okay. I didn't realize that. So tell me about each one of those. What's the differences between those? And are any of them the suitcase hobbyist thing that you explained that you first saw?
None of them are the small suitcase thing. These are big, huge, heavy, professional cutting lathes. One is a standalone single Presto cutting lathe. Presto was kind of the name in making these machines back in the sort of 1950s. And then Neumann kind of replaced them in the 70s. And then since the 80s, no one's really been building them anymore. So that's just a bit of cutting lathe history there for you. But so I have a single cutting lathe, and then I have a double cutting lathe, which has 2, which is one big sort of huge, massive machine with 2 turntables and 2 cutting heads on it. And that's actually the last one of its kind, we think, as far as we can all tell, in the world that's still running. And we've kind of got provenance that dates it back to recording at the Nuremberg trials, which is just crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's real piece of history.
So you think that lathe was used to record the Nuremberg trials?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
If I recall the story right, the one we're talking about is in mono.
It was, yeah.
It was in mono, and then you figured out a way to turn it into stereo.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that process, that journey? Was it difficult to do that? And how? I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah, welcome to the club. Yeah, that's record cutting for you. It's like I say, very steep learning curve, and luckily there's a really great forum where us nerdy record cutters hang out called the Secret Society of the Lathe Trolls. And there's as you can imagine, it's not quite a secret society, but it's a pretty niche thing. But thankfully, there's some really knowledgeable people on there that have been cutting for decades, and have a lot of knowledge and are willing to share that knowledge. So there's a lot of forum discussion and a lot of questions and a lot of people kind of piecing stuff together as a collective. So I've learned a lot from there, and then thankfully as well as that, there's a handful, there's 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 super clever engineers out there who have taken it upon themselves to redesign these cutting heads and start redesigning parts that can retrofit these old cutting lathes that we all have. So there's 2 guys that I know of. There might be 1 or 2 more, but there's 2 guys that have started making brand new stereo cutting heads that will retrofit onto these older machines. So they're doing all the clever stuff. I'm kind of buying the cut ahead, and then it takes a little bit of fiddling around to get them fitted and balanced correctly. But I can't really take any credit. It's these other guys that are geniuses, really, and helping us, the people with the older lathes, upgrade them so we can cut really, really loud stereo sort of modern stuff.
You've done a great job on your Instagram page of laying out the differences between, mass-produced records and these bespoke, one-offs. Can you explain that to the audience, the differences between that? Yeah,
sure. So a pressed record is typically the type of record that you will find in a record shop or that you'll buy online. Most of them are pressed records, and they are made in a pressing plant in a factory, and they're mass produced. And to make a pressed record, you have to cut the master first. So it's always cut onto a blank, and then that blank is taken off to the factory. It goes through several steps of chemical processing to turn it into a stamp, which literally stamps or presses the grooves into the record. So you cut one master and then you send it off, and you can make lots of copies from that initial master.
Could you also explain the blanks that you're using, that one would use to make that style of record?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So that's another important difference. The blanks that you use to make the masters for pressed records are called lacquers, and they're actually a metal disc with a thin coating of lacquer on it. So you cut your audio into these blanks, and then they are playable, but by playing them you actually wear the grooves out, so they're not meant to actually be played. They're only meant to be cut for the process of turning into the stamp. But what used to happen is people would be in the studio, they'd get their lacquer cut, and the engineer would be package that up, put it in a box to send off to the pressing plant, and the band would go, well, I want to play it now. Why can't we play it? You know, and so the engineer would say, all right, well, I'll tell you what, I'll cut you another one, but it's going to wear out, and you know, you'll get 20 or 30 plays out of it, but it will wear out with every play. And that's what are called dub plates. So you'd get your master disc, then you'd cut a double or a dub plate, just so the artist could have a copy to take home and play a few times, or if they were a DJ, they could play it out at a club that night or whatever. But that obviously the dub plate thing has the inherent problem of wearing out really quickly. So people far cleverer than me came up with the concept of cutting directly onto a material closer to a finished pressed record, which then wouldn't wear out, and you could play it as many times as you like. And that's what we call lathe cut records, and that's what I make. But the only big difference with lathe cut records is if you want one copy, you cut one and you can have it and take it away. But if you want 5 or 10 copies, you have to stand and cut each one in real time. So, you know, you don't get to just cut one and send it off to be reproduced. You know, you have to cut each one by hand and stand there and oversee it. So they're great for small runs for independent artists, but they are quite time intensive to make.
It's almost like the difference between a mass-produced CD versus burning a one-off CD, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if anyone out there is familiar with the sort of printing world, it's like a mass-produced poster versus a screen print, where you have to set up the screen and load up the ink, and then you screen it. You press the screen once, and that you get your one poster. Then you have to repeat that process for every poster you make.
And what is the difference in material from a lathe cut record versus a mass-produced pressed vinyl record?
So the finished pressed record they're made out of PVC, polyvinyl chloride, and a lathe cut record is a similar but different type of plastic called PETG. So they're very similar, actually. They're just two slightly different types of plastic.
Is there much of a physical difference between them in how they feel if you were to pick them up?
An engineer would tell the difference. A cutting engineer would be able to tell, but I think most people wouldn't notice that they were a different thing.
I would assume the advantage to doing lathe cut records versus mass-produced pressed records is cost and the ability to do a small number of units. So if you're a smaller band, you don't have as much money, but you do want to sell, like, you know, a few records at a gig, they can come to you and say, get 10 of them pressed up, sell them at the gig, next gig, get another 10, and just keep doing that.
Yeah, exactly. You've kind of just described my business model for lathe cut records, and yeah, that's exactly what I do. With press records, there's always a minimum order, as I imagine your listeners will probably already be well aware of this, but so it's quite an investment to get vinyl made, and before getting into this myself, I'd always ask people when I was mastering, you know, are you getting vinyl done for these masters? You know, and so many bands would say, oh, I'd love to, but we just can't afford it. We're not going to sell 500, and we don't have the money to get that many made and stuff. So yeah, being able to just cut 10 at a time or 20 at a time, and then sell those out and get another batch when they're needed is really great for independent artists.
And the durability of a lathe cut record versus a PVC based vinyl record, is there much of a difference there?
No, they'll lathe cuts will last forever. So there is, when I was talking about dub plates earlier, the dub plates cut on the lacquers will wear out, and that's where the kind of myth comes from that lathe cut records don't last very long. So if you cut a lacquer on a lathe, it will wear out. But no, not many people are really doing that now, cutting actual dub plates on lacquers. Even though people are calling them dub plates, they're mostly cut as plastic lathe cut records now.
And is there a difference in the lathe itself in its ability to cut onto in other words, you can't use the same lathe to cut lathe cut records that you would to cut lacquer masters?
You can use the same lathe. You would just use a different type of cutting stylus. So you can have the same lathe, the same cutting head, but you would just use a different stone. So for lacquers, you'd use a slightly softer cutting stone like a ruby or a sapphire. But for cutting lathe cut records, you'd use a diamond tip stylus because that's a bit harder and that cuts into the plastic a bit easier.
Tell me if I'm wrong about this. Now, a lathe typically has a little vacuum tube attached right. And when I say vacuum tube, sorry, audience, literally a tube that's a vacuum.
Yeah.
Not a valve, not a tube.
Oh, no.
But like a little plastic tube connected to a vacuum system that takes the excess that's being cut from the record. I'm to understand that material is flammable versus the lathe cut records. Is that right?
The lacquer material for cutting onto the master for press records, that's extremely flammable. But the swarf from lathe cut records isn't as flammable.
And what did you call it? Swarf?
Swarf, yeah. Sometimes people call it chip sometimes, but I've stuck with swarf. I think, I'm not really sure where the difference came in the etymology of it all, but yeah.
Yeah, I've seen your video where it looks like almost like a wig. Like I think you even referred to it as old lady hair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's really fine. Yeah, it's just, and if you can imagine how thin a groove of a record is, it's that thin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a whole new business model right there for you.
Yeah.
Turn the swarf into wigs.
Yeah, I'll have to get in touch with some wig shops and see if they're interested.
Sell your excess swarf for profit.
Yeah.
So is there a big difference in the mastering process for you for making lathe cut records versus, say, lacquer based masters?
No, generally I'd master the same for vinyl, which whether it be cutting a lacquer to be turned into press records or to be cutting a lathe cut record. Obviously, I cut lathe cut records on my machine. There's a few things that I like to do so I know that the cuts are going to sound great. Whereas if I was sending vinyl masters off for a different studio to cut lacquers, I would just do just a general vinyl mastering job. So if I know I'm going to cut them, there's a couple of things that I can try to do because I know my cutting heads and I know my system really well.
And do you physically have the capability to do lacquer cut records?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I've got some lacquers, and I've kind of experimented with cutting lacquers, but like I was mentioning with the cutting stones being different, and they're quite expensive, and they need regular sharpening. So I've kind of, for now, I've chosen to just cut lathe cuts, rather than trying to do both and constantly having to switch stones and styluses and probably have to recalibrate every time, because I don't think I'd get as consistent results as if I was to just stick with one type and only cut that all the time. But I would love, it's kind of a bit of a longer term goal of mine to get a separate machine to cut lacquers and have that here in the mastering room, so I can cut lacquers and then do runs of lathe cuts as well, but not have to sort of keep altering the machines, on a regular basis.
And where does one source the blanks for lathe cut records? And is it the same as the people that make the lacquer blanks?
No, there was a big fire. Some of your listeners might remember it, or you might. The Apollo plant in the US burnt down over, I think it was during the COVID in 2020 maybe. So there's one place in Japan that makes the blank lacquers now. And until recently, there was only one main place in sort of Europe who made the blanks for the lathe cuts. But as of sort of this year, there's a second supplier has opened up here in the UK. So there's a guy in France and a guy in the UK now that make the plastics for the blank lathe cuts. And there's just one supplier for the lacquers over in Japan.
Are they all made of the same material typically?
Yeah, all made of the same material.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I'm sure as a result, your business really is super independent band centric, because those lathe cut records would attract a particular audience of client who are doing, as we've said, these smaller run bespoke copies.
Yeah, definitely. Typically, yeah, they're great for independent artists. Although I work with some record labels who get large runs of pressed records done, but then they'll still come to me because they want something. They might want to do 20 or 50 copies of something a bit special, or an unreleased track, or like something for a release party, or like a birthday or something like that. So it's really interesting actually, that although labels or artists that have the capacity to get thousands of press records, they still like to come and get lathe cut records because they can be made so bespoke. So if you got a run of 10, say, we could do something to the audio or to the artwork to make each individual record unique. So, like as an example, I've had a band put a voice note on the end of a song. So they've recorded a separate voice note for each record. So they got I think 20 done and sent me 20 voice notes, and we just tagged the voice notes onto the end of each song. So when their fans are buying one, they're getting really an actual unique thing there, which is really cool. I'm really into that.
That's amazing. Really, really cool stuff that you're doing there. How much of your business is, if we're talking about mastering and lathe cutting records, is that all one thing, or have they become two separate things? Are you well known for this lathe cutting thing?
Yeah, I've kind of tried to keep it under my hat to some extent. I kind of don't really advertise it, but my mastering clients obviously know that I do it. Anyone that follows me on social media will start to get an idea that I cut records and get little glimpses. And then there's sort of just local artists and studios and stuff that know that I cut records as well. So sometimes it will be someone, I master for someone and I say, do you want records doing? Or, I can just cut you a one-off as a keepsake, or you could cut 5 or 10 or whatever you like. And then sometimes I might get a band come to me and they've already got masters, or it could be an older project, but they'd never managed to get a vinyl done of it. So they ask me to just do a small run that they'll, for a tour or something like that. So it's kind of different every week. It's always kind of changing.
And I bet it's a constant income stream for you, because I would assume the demand for it is fairly high.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And that's, I mean, that's kind of why I've not really pushed advertising it, because it's very time consuming, and I'm very busy all the time anyway. And I want to make sure that I can really serve my mastering clients for, first. If they
Yeah.
want records, they kind of get priority. But there's some really cool advances coming all the time at the minute within the people that are making the blanks are managing to get new colours and splatter style and liquid filled disc sets and all this kind of cool stuff. So this year has just been crazy for innovation with the record stuff. So it's really really exciting.
I'm surprised that somebody is not trying to make a new machine or new, series of maybe smaller, more technologically advanced machines to sell, because if you can make a lathe cut record and it doesn't come with the flammability of lacquer cut records as a potential danger, I'm shocked that somebody's not doing that. But maybe the cost for research and development is just too intense and they just wouldn't make their money back.
Yeah, there are a couple of people who are making very high quality lathes aimed more at lacquer cutting for commercial studios who will cut the lacquers to be sent to pressing plants. But yeah, it's the R&D. There's so many intricate and precise things to get right with these machines. It's from following a couple of people's journeys on making their own lathes, it's incredibly complicated to get all the different parts working in harmony, and then custom making all the parts and doing all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's incredibly expensive and time consuming. So
Do you see, along with, the clientele that would, do a lacquer or a lathe cut record, do they start to ask about other older physical formats such as cassettes?
yeah, some do actually. Yeah, some people have asked me if I make cassettes as well, and I have actually seen a bit of a rise in that as well over the past few years. People wanting cassettes or asking me to master for cassette and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely I've seen a bit of a rise in that as well. I guess because physical merch is really the only way independent artists can make money at the minute.
My experience as a person who grew up with all of this and then
Mm.
saw it, disappear and now it's reappearing, I find that younger people in general are intrigued, with everything from buying old turntables to even buying old Walkmans. There's a company, I think they're called FIO. They're selling new Walkman, portable cassette players and CD players
Oh wow.
currently. And I'm just like
Yeah.
thinking, wow, this is interesting. And
Yeah.
with sites like Bandcamp that enable the artist to, facilitate selling physical media, I think
Mm.
it's intriguing.
Yeah, definitely. Streaming's here to stay, and it's incredibly useful. It's a great tool to listen to stuff on the move and be able to discover new stuff, on your phone. There's a lot of positives. But, if artists can't support themselves and can't, afford to fund touring or fund going into the studio, it's not only artists that suffer, it's us engineers suffer as well. No one will be going to recording studios or getting stuff mixed and mastered professionally in 10 years if they just have to sink money into everything and they never get a chance to claw anything back. So
Yeah.
I've kind of taken it upon myself to make sure I try and force independent artists to do something to make money. Don't streaming's fine and it's necessary, but don't let that be your entire focus. You've got to get some records or some cassettes or something made so you can actually make some money and sustain and grow your career.
You mentioned it in the form that you filled out before the interview that I asked you to fill out. You mentioned a bit about chronic illness and kidney replacement, which one of your recent posts indicated that you got that kidney from your brother.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and the challenges of what you've dealt with and how that dictates how you run your audio career?
Yeah, it's so I have an immune system condition, and it's a chronic thing, and it attacks your kidneys. And 8 years ago, my brother very kindly donated one of his kidneys to me so that I could keep on living. And it's challenging having a chronic illness, especially being self-employed, and then especially being self-employed in the creative industry, because as I'm sure you know, and probably a lot of your listeners will know, you have to work a lot, but long hours, lots of days. Not only do you have to do your job, that your title, you then have to be a social media guy, you have to be your own manager, you have to do, there's all the other stuff you have to do outside of it. So yeah, it's challenging when you're kind of, you want to do this stuff and your body kind of just says, no, you're not doing that today. You've got to stay in bed or you've got to rest. But thankfully, I've kind of got good at eating healthily, exercising as much as I can. And it's not a constant, huge effect on my life, thankfully. I managed to manage it quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Being self-employed and having probably about 2/3 of my work is remote. Probably about 1/3 of my time I have people in the studio with me doing attended sessions or wanting to cut records and stuff. So I can be a bit flexible with, if I'm having a day when my chronic illness is flaring up a little bit, I can be a bit flexible and sort of have a slow morning and make up for it on a day where I have got, my sort of full allocation of energy. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I don't know any different. So I kind of just get on with it, I guess.
Yeah. I guess you just accept it for what it is and think, okay, I'll work around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't have a choice. So, yeah.
Unlike us here in the US, you've got a nationalized healthcare system that allows you as an independent contractor, self-employed individual to run your business and not, I'm making some giant assumptions here. So you tell me if I'm wrong in any of this, but you don't have to worry about seeking out healthcare because it's provided for UK citizens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's free. It's free for us. So my entire operation, my hospital stay, all my treatment is completely free. I pay a relatively small amount for my medication that I have to take every day, but it's it's very little that I actually have to pay, and I'm happy. The part that I do have to pay, I'm very happy to do so. But unfortunately, I know I've read this on the sort of kidney care sort of program that I'm in. A lot of people in the US with my condition do pass away because of the enormous cost of going through a transplant procedure and stuff like that. Which is really sad.
Yeah. Well, God, that could be a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a can of worms. So yeah.
I love that it's a part of your life, but it doesn't hold you back. You really seem to have a passion for what it is that you're doing in your lane of audio. And I love it. I love watching your Instagram videos because I learn like a little tidbit all the time about, Lathe cut records, which admittedly in as much as many years as I've been at this, I didn't realize that that was a thing. And once again, this goes to my concept of you're not always the smartest person in the room, no matter how much experience you have. And I love learning about it from your social media channels, or from your Instagram in particular. It's very fascinating. And which obviously, listeners, by the way, I will clearly include that in the show notes so you can go check it out yourself, because Ben's doing some cool stuff there. Before we go, what are some of the challenges that you're facing off the top of your head as an audio professional? I mean, aside from the chronic illness, challenges, but just as a professional, what's difficult about being an independent audio professional to you?
I guess my kind of ethos and my whole thing behind the studio is kind of born out of one of my first experiences of mastering, which was trying to get something mastered, finding it really difficult to talk to someone about it. And it was like, submit your files and you receive them, and that was it. There weren't any revisions. There wasn't any conversation about how you want your masters or anything like that. And I found it a bit of a weird process that I didn't understand as a musician getting my stuff mastered. So my ethos is to be very communicative, and I like to talk to my clients. They can ring me. We do Zoom calls. They come into the studio. And I like to be as transparent as I can. But that comes with, obviously, it takes a bit more time than if I was to just have a form on my website where you upload your track and then you get your track sent back. So I guess really it's kind of trying to balance my time with making enough money to keep the studio going and keep, earn a living for myself. And then I really love working with independent artists because I feel like that's where I can do make the most improvement on their kind of stuff and help them understand the process and help them along with their journey a little bit. But they're all skint. They've got no money, so I'm always kind of trying to keep my rates reasonable or not put my rates up, but also I've got to earn a living as well. I guess just trying to encourage independent artists to get their stuff done professionally. Mixing as well. Go to a professional mix engineer. Go to a professional mastering engineer. I know it costs a bit of money, but it's so worth it. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to really convince people that don't have that money to spend, or they're maybe a bit cautious about doing so. To do it and get the professional results, because it'll help your career so much. So it's kind of treading that line really between, we've got to be realistic about money and stuff like that. It's always a bit of a thorny subject, but trying to convince people to get things done right rather than skimp. Get their mate who's at college to mix and master their album, and then it goes out and they wonder why they can't get radio play and stuff like that, and all that kind of stuff.
And final question, do you have a financial philosophy that you put into practice in order to survive?
Well, I'm a terrible businessman.
Okay.
So I guess no would be the short answer to that. I'm trying to be a bit more sort of stick to my rates. I know I'm worth my rate, but if I'm just a sucker for someone going, I'd love to do this, but I can't afford it. I'm like,
well,
so I'm trying to find a way to help people without it negatively impacting myself, I guess. So, which is a whole spiritual journey, I guess.
Well, it's good to see you and good to talk to you again. Thanks for making time for me to come on the show. I love learning about this aspect of our business, and and listeners, just if you're on the whole vinyl, record, LP, whatever, kick, and you want to learn more, I'll also put a link in the show notes to my interview with Jeff Powell. My second interview with Jeff Powell, that's a deep dive into lacquer cutting. And so I think, between Jeff and Ben, it'll be good companion pieces for an education on record cutting in general.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to that episode. I loved it as well, as and I learnt a lot as well, even as a record cutter myself. It's really interesting. And thanks for having me on, because I'm a huge fan of the podcast, and kind of feel a little imposter syndrome sitting on here against all these mega famous audio engineers, and there's little old me.
Everybody says that all the time. You fit right in. You're totally right in it with everybody else. So, but thanks again, Ben. Great to see you, and you take care.
Thanks, Matt.